All right, today we are diving deep into just 3 verses from Isaiah chapter 14. But let me tell you, they are absolutely packed with meaning. We're going to see how they've been interpreted to predict a return from exile, a complete flip in power, and a promise of rest that some people believe is still unfolding right now. Let's get into it. So these are the verses right here, Isaiah 14, verses 1 and 3. And as you'll see, interpreters have found layers of meaning in these words that stretch all the way from ancient Babylon to our modern world. So let's break down exactly what they're saying. Okay, let's start with the very first verse, which really lays the foundation. This is where the prophecy of mercy and a return home kicks off. You know, what's so interesting is this one verse is doing two pretty distinct things. First, you've got this very direct promise to Israel that they'll return. And then you have this really intriguing mention of strangers who are going to join them. Let's unpack how those two ideas have been understood. So you might be wondering, is this just some kind of vague spiritual promise? Well, for a lot of interpreters, the answer is a big no. They see a very real, very specific historical event here, the end of the Babylonian exile, when the Persians conquered Babylon and actually allowed a remnant of the Jewish people to go back to their homeland. And what about that line, the one about the strangers? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The interpretation here isn't about one group conquering another. It's about integration. The idea is that some people from Babylon actually converted to Judaism and joined the Israelites, becoming part of their community. All right, let's move on to the next verse because this is where things get, well, dramatic. Verse 2 describes this unbelievable total reversal of roles. I mean, listen to that language. It is incredibly strong. You've got phrases like servants and handmaids, and then, wow, take them captives whose captives they were. It paints a picture of a complete power shift. The people who were once oppressed are now ruling over their former oppressors. Okay, so when you hear that, it definitely raises some questions, right? How are we supposed to understand this? The source material clarifies that we shouldn't really think of this as traditional slavery. It's seen more as a radical shift in the social hierarchy, a kind of boss-to-employee relationship, where the Babylonians who converted would now serve the Israelites. And here's a quick, interesting little side note. The source points out that some religious traditions see parallels here with other stories. For example, in the Book of Mormon, there's an account of the Nephites being joined by native peoples who converted. It just shows how these ancient texts get interpreted and applied in all sorts of different contexts. And all of this brings us to verse 3, which shifts gears a bit. It moves from the logistics of returning home to the emotional and spiritual outcome of it all, a final, promised rest from suffering. See, this idea of rest is everything. It's the key. It's not just about getting your land back. It's about an end to sorrow, an end to fear, and an end to that hard bondage. This one word, rest, becomes the pivot point for how this entire prophecy gets understood from here on out. But that begs a huge question, doesn't it? When does this rest actually happen? I mean, if you look at history, after the return from Babylon, there wasn't a lot of rest. They had conflicts with the Samaritans, then the Greeks, then the Romans. It just keeps going. And that historical reality is what makes a lot of interpreters think, maybe there's more to this story. Which leads interpreters to a really fascinating idea, that maybe this one prophecy is actually talking about two different fulfillments or two different restorations. And this is a great way to see it laid out. You've got the first restoration, that's ancient history, the return from Babylon back in 538 BC, but then you have this idea of a second restoration, something that's happening in our modern era, starting in the 20th century, and some would say is still going on right now. And for those who see this second restoration, they point to a whole series of modern events as evidence. They see a prophetic pattern that starts back in 1917, leads to the land being restored in 47, the modern nation being born in 48, Jerusalem coming back under Jewish control in 67, and all the way up to 2018 with its recognition as the capital. But here's the critical question. Even with the establishment of a modern state, has that promise of rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear actually come true? Well, the source material argues pretty clearly not yet. And the reason? The persistent reality of regional conflict. And yeah, this really drives the point home. Since its founding in 1948, the nation has seen one major war after another. For people interpreting Isaiah's prophecy through this modern lens, this history of conflict is exactly why that ultimate promise of absolute peace and rest is still seen as a future hope, not a present reality.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's this idea of a prophecy with a dual horizon. For the original audience, way back in Isaiah's time, it was a near-term promise about returning from Babylon. But for many people reading it today, it's become a lens for interpreting modern history and even current events.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? How can a text written over 2,700 years ago continue to have such a profound impact on how we see the world? It's a testament to the enduring power of these words that they continue to shape how people interpret the distant past and the headlines of today.